Next, let's talk about meal timing and how when we're eating and how closely together we're eating between meals has an impact on blood sugars. This is something near and dear to my heart because over my 23 years with type 1, I've spent a lot of time experimenting with this and finding what works best for me. Let's get into it.
All right, so let's talk about why meal timing matters, why consistent eating patterns can help with your blood sugars. Now, from you have to consider here the circadian rhythm aspect of energy utilization as well. Like we mentioned with dawn phenomenon, when you wake up, when the sun hits your eyes, hits your skin, this is a sign that the day has begun and your body is going to need more energy than when it was asleep. So we need to take that into consideration when we start to eat food and use insulin to help use the food that we eat. So eating consistently, and again, we'll talk more about the timing of things in just a little bit, but being consistent in your eating patterns can help maintain steady blood sugar levels. It can optimize your insulin effectiveness from an insulin sensitivity standpoint as well as an insulin resistance standpoint. And it can prevent those roller coaster rides of a hyper, then a hypo, a hyper, then a hypo. And the kind of like sporadic, irregular eating patterns lead to unpredictable blood sugar fluctuations. Just think of the circumstances in your day that lead you to eat irregularly, right? Most of them are going to have some sort of stress event tied to it. Cortisol is going to increase your blood sugar. It's going to increase your insulin resistance. The decisions that you're making in those times of stress are usually going to be for worse food options, right? Like when you're knocked out of your rhythm of things when it comes to eating, you're a lot more likely to make poor food decisions. So just be mindful of that when it comes to creating a consistent eating pattern. So best practices for meal timing. And this is like I'm treading lightly here because again, there are so many different options. And I've heard of so many different success stories and failure stories from people with diabetes. I really don't think that there is a one size fits all. The thing is, you got to be consistent. People intermittent fast, they'll go the 16 hours off, 8 hours on. I've seen people do one meal a day and have success with it. It's just about being consistent and giving your body adequate time to adapt to whatever system that it is that you're trying. Because I don't at all think either that you should just pick one and be done with it and just be assigned to that the rest of forever just because it worked for you in that time. Experiment a little bit, as much as you're comfortable, but find what works best for you and really settle into it and give it a chance to maximize its potential for you. Another important point when it comes to meal timing, no matter how many meals or snacks you're having a day, make sure that you align those meals to better suit insulin action and sensitivity. And what I mean by this is give your body a chance to properly digest foods and use the insulin that you need to use the food. So for me, this means creating a window of physical activity after meals so that I can move that food around, so I can circulate lymph, so I can circulate my insulin and better regulate my blood sugars. The worst thing that happens to me is that when I eat something and I just sit. So, in college, if I were in a lecture and I needed to sit for an hour and a half at a time, I didn't want to eat directly beforehand because I knew no matter how much insulin I gave myself, that insulin wasn't going to be circulating very well because I was just stagnant sitting in my chair. So make sure that when you eat, you're creating an opportunity for your body to best use the food, best use the insulin. This could mean a smaller meal or a smaller snack before periods of long stagnation. This might mean breaking up long periods of sitting or non-activity with a walk around the block, with jumping jacks or push-ups in your office space. whatever you need, make sure that you're giving yourself a chance to properly circulate stuff so that your blood sugar doesn't spike as a result of that. This goes for bedtime as well. I try to create at least a 2 to 3 hour buffer where I have not eaten anything. The food that I had for dinner or lunch has had time to kind of settle and move through, so that I'm not having to guard against highs, hyperglycemia, as I sleep. The worst thing I could do is have to eat something right before I go to bed. I don't like to do that. And then portion control, right? Are we able to push the plate away? This is something I've, as a student, a D1 student athlete, I always, more food was always better because I could build more muscle, I could be stronger, I could be faster, whatever. And I've always kind of naturally tended towards being a skinny kid. But portion control, it helps manage carbohydrate intake, right? We don't want to be taking in more than we're using. That's going to lead to fat mass accumulation. It's also going to lead to a lot more hectic blood sugar spikes and a lot more insulin needed. This is going to prevent over or under eating, depending on how much time between meals you have, and all of that can disrupt our stress hormone and energy balance. So you need to know the carb content of your food. In the early stages of having diabetes, read every nutrition label you possibly can. Build that internal Rolodex of what foods are and what their carb content is. You have to read the ingredient, just while you're there reading the nutrition facts, read the ingredient labels too. Find out what's in it. Find out what could impact how those carbs are used from a dietary standpoint, from a protein standpoint, from a fat standpoint. Use tools, at least in the early stages. Again, I don't use food scales or measuring cups a lot anymore. Kind of like built up a pretty good foundation of what carbs are and how they interact with the things that I combine them with. But food scales, measuring cups, visual guides, like hand, palm, what have you. I remember in my those first few weeks after I was diagnosed, going to school with little Tupperware containers marked with 1 cup equals this many carbs. And that helped me bolus from there on out. But yeah, useful tools. Because, and portion control is so critical for people with diabetes, because what people without diabetes don't realize is that people with diabetes are missing the hormonal feeling of fullness. Okay? So I've spoken about amylin before in previous podcast episodes. I haven't mentioned it yet today, but amylin is a hormone co-secreted with insulin by beta cells. So beta cells actually make 2 hormones. Amylin is responsible for the feeling of satiety and fullness after we eat. It's going to slow how quickly food moves through our stomach and into our small intestine. It does this to help pace the food to match the effect of the insulin, right? Because if we just ate food and it just like slammed into our intestines, our pancreas is going to have to make more and more insulin to accommodate that sudden influx of food. Amylin helps to pace it so that our blood sugars stay nice and steady instead of just going up and down and up and down. With type 1 diabetes, because of our loss of beta cell mass, we have less insulin, obviously, but less amylin as well. So we don't have that signal for I'm full. We don't have the brakes on eating. So what that means is that we have to be our own brakes, right? We're waiting for that feeling of fullness and it never comes, so we keep eating. And if that's the case, we end up overeating, because then our only signal for, hey, I'm full, is the literal pressure on our stomach that it can't be filled anymore. And by that time, we've already eaten too much. Things are already backed up. This leads to things like GERD, acid reflux. It can also lead to just adverse blood sugar, because that food is now taking longer and longer and longer, and you're having to space your boluses out. What you thought was enough up front turns out not to be enough in the long run, because you've just backed up your stomach and your GI tract so much that you need more insulin later down the line. So it's a very, very important point. You are your own full signal. It took me so long to learn this, but you really have to hone in on the fact that I am what is stopping me from eating, not the feeling of fullness. Okay. So here are some of my portion control tips that I use on a regular basis. Have the veggie, have the less carb dense, high nutrient, high fiber part of your meal be the main dish. Have it take up the most volume on your plate. Proteins and starches are accessories and complements to that main dish. A lot of times, oh, we're having steak tonight. Oh, we're having brisket. Oh, I made mashed potatoes. That's the thing that we want to make the star of our plate. No, those are the background dancers to the main star, which is the volume, which is the nutrient dense vegetable part of it. And then from a feeling of fullness, because we don't have that amylin telling us we're actually full, veggies are a great way to get the volume, but not the density, right? So we have a lot of food taking up a lot of space in our stomachs, so we actually feel full, but we're not getting that huge carb overload. And then when it comes to food preparation, be mindful of your pre or post meal bites. I'm as guilty of this 23 years in as anybody. Munching on scraps or little snacks. You open the spice cabinet or a cabinet to help add something to dinner. You see something, you're like, oh, let me just get a little bite of that. Those are all things that add up, right? And when you go and reflect back on your meal, you go, oh, well, why are my blood sugars up? I only ate this, this, and this. That was what was on your plate. You ate a little bit before and you ate a little bit after. So just be mindful of those extra little things around mealtime adding up. And don't eat out of the container. This sounds so bad, but when you're kind of just in the rhythm of eating out of the container is going to set you up to eat too much. Whether it be ice cream, whether it be peanut butter, nut butter, anything, dip, hummus, whatever. Give yourself the boundary of a separate dish with a pre-measured amount, so that when you are done eating what you gave yourself to eat, that means you're done eating. Okay. Again, this comes with experience. I'm sure everyone will get to, will have a time where they're like, hey, I just wanted a spoonful. How did I eat this whole thing? So make sure that you are setting yourself up for success by pre-measuring and setting things, making sure that the risk of overeating is less and less. And this is also for me too. Number 4, when you're done eating or cleaning up after having prepared your food, get out of the kitchen. Get away from the food, because what I'll do is I'll hang around and I'll think to myself, I just want a little, out of sight, out of mind. Go for a walk, get outside, go to another room. The joke is, if you hang around the barbershop too long, you might just get a haircut. If you hang around the kitchen after you're done eating, you might just eat more than you're supposed to. So get out of the kitchen when you're done eating. Huge, huge point. And it took me a long time to learn that.